Good morning. Good morning, Commissioner. I just want to make sure that you can hear us and we can hear you.
I can see you and I can hear you. Good morning.
Okay, just a second. We can't hear you.
Can't hear me.
Testing.
I can hear you.
There we go.
There we go.
Mary.
Now we can hear you. All right. Okay. Welcome and good morning, everyone. We've got a full house today, so we're going to get the show on the road here. I will call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal session for July 18th, 2024. It is 10:01 in the morning, and I will go ahead and lead us in the flag salute. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States Thank you. And we have Commissioner Starrett is joining us via Zoom. Item C is our calendar session. Is there anything, commissioners, to add to calendar? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to public comment. Item D, this time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi-judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. And I do want to acknowledge we received some written comment, but if you are here today to provide general public comment on anything that's not on our agenda, it's not part of the public hearing, now's the time to come forward. And if you're online, please raise your virtual hand and we will call on you. All right, seeing and hearing none. We will move on to our very special presentation today. We are joined by our 2024, that should read 2024, Yamhill County Fair Ambassadors. And today we have Emma Mattison, who is a senior, Chloe Bingman, who is also a senior, and Madison Greger, who is our one and only junior. So ladies, if you want to come forward.
All right, well, my name is Ambassador Emma Mattison. As you said, I was a senior at Newburgh High School and I just graduated this year. Some things about me, I really enjoy volunteering with my church. I have a herd of 4 meat goats that I take around the Pacific Northwest. I show them in American Quarter Goat Association. And I also have a 4-year-old quarter horse who I've been breaking under saddle. I plan to attend Carroll College as well in the coming fall to study biology and zoology and potentially become a veterinarian.
Where's Carroll College?
It's in Montana. Just
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
My name is Ambassador Chloe Bingman. As you said, I was a senior. I graduated from Newburgh High School, and I plan to attend Chemeketa Community College in the fall, just to get out from that. After I'm done with Chemeketa, I plan to transfer to pursue a career in agricultural marketing. Outside of that, I've done a lot of time volunteering through my FFA chapter, 4-H chapter, and I plan to show rabbits and cattle.
Great.
Hi, I'm Ambassador Madison Greger, and I was a junior this past year. I'm an incoming senior to Yamhill Carlton High School. Oh goodness, I don't know where to start with me. I'm currently serving as the president of our FFA chapter at the high school, as well as my 4-H club, where I show sheep and market hogs. And then in addition to that, I'm also serving on the student body as our vice president for ASB. And I'm also part of NHS at my high school. So in addition to that, I don't have current career plans at the moment. I do know that I would like to major in business and minor in finance. and potentially do a little bit of accounting as well because I do enjoy that. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. So for those in the audience, part of being a fair ambassador is to do public speaking and advocate on behalf of our county fair and get people to come and enjoy the fair. So this is a part of what fair ambassadors do. So it's really exciting to have everyone here. Mary, can you see? Oh, you can see. Awesome. Any questions, comments?
Just a few comments. I have been to all of their senior graduations and presented the scholarships, and it was phenomenal to see how many, not just only our scholarship that we gave out, but the multiple scholarships that these girls have received.
Right. Yeah.
And in Madison's case, they just took #1 in the nation, their team for trap
For
shoot.
trap shooting, I saw that.
And
That's awesome.
that's a huge accomplishment. Last year they did pretty good. Madison actually got 8 overall on individuals last year. Third, 8 this year, and then their team overall just took #1 in the nation. So that's very cool. So congratulations to all of you guys.
Yeah, it was my honor to participate in your interviews when we were interviewing for fair ambassadors. And one of the things that employers are saying more and more these days is that when they have sort of the younger, quote unquote, younger generation coming in for job interviews, there's a pattern that they're noticing that there's a lack of eye contact and sort of a lack of these basic social skills. And you guys are the opposite of that. It was really, really impressive to see you step forward in front of, total strangers and advocate for yourselves. So that was just really impressive. And I look forward to seeing what you guys do in the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So do we want to get a picture?
Does Mary have anything she wants to
Oh.
add?
I just want to say how impressive it is, and I appreciate that you've shown up at so many events, and you're all very impressive, and it's an encouragement to see that not everybody is as we're, defining the younger generation today, and that you guys have it all figured out. So all the best to you, and thank you. You represent us well.
All right. So we will.
Just the commissioners first. Yeah. I know, yeah.
This is turned off.
I'll do this one, you do that one. Sorry. I wanted to get a picture of Leslie in there too.
Oh, it wasn't turned off. There we go. One more. Smile, you sound pretty. Get it, Leslie? Is it supposed to flash?
All right, now you.
I don't know, it doesn't, if it thinks there's enough light, it doesn't flash.
You go up there. Get a picture of you in there too, Leslie. You're important. You're important in all of this. All right, everybody, say cheese. Say goats, I don't know. Baby goats. Baby goats, they always make you smile. Excellent, very good. Excellent, thank you.
We invite everybody to the fair. It's gonna be amazing.
We'll Photoshop you in, Mary. No worries. We've got the skills. All right. Okay, so moving on in our agenda, we have nothing under work session today. Our consent agenda is over a page long, so I'll go through it really quickly here. We've got numerous minutes that we have gone through and approved. Some lipstick appointments, reappointments. welcoming Brett Turley to the Yamhill County Fair Board. That's
I got
very
it.
exciting.
Brent Turley.
Brent?
Yep.
Why was does it say Brent on you?
No, I
Okay.
corrected it.
And then some things for the fair. The emergency operations plan, we do have Sergeant Young here in case there's any questions about that. So just let me know. And then obviously our YCSO contracts for Amity, Lafayette, and Willamina, as well as our 4th year of our IT software contract. So does anyone need to pull anything from consent? Nope.
Nope.
Okay. I will move approval of the consent agenda. Any further discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, motion passes. Okay. Item H is old business. H1 is consideration of approval of a recommendation from Economic Development Competitive Grant Review Committee regarding the Economic Development Competitive Grant Program. This was continued from a while back, June 30th of 2024, and we do have our Economic Development Director, Joya Goodrum, here today. So commissioners, last time, if you go in the Wayback Machine, we asked Joya to provide us some additional information regarding the grant applications themselves, who was on the committee, some various things that we felt that we needed. I think, and then in addition to that, Joya, you've sent us information about how other counties structure their economic development grants.
to you.
Sent it to me, which is very interesting. It's very different from what we do. And so my inclination with this is to, and I think what I was hoping from the last discussion was to set up more of a work session where we can talk about how we manage these so that it's consistent. And maybe we develop some policies around how we manage these grants. I don't know if commissioners, if you're open to that, but based on the previous discussion, we seem to have not only issues with sort of what's in front of us, but also the philosophy around how we manage these grants. And so if there's still issues around how we do this, I feel like that's really the first step. We should be putting this into a work session and going through that in detail. Commissioner Starrett?
Thank you, Chair. What I would like to do is, in addition to the sort of the philosophy around our policy, because it's taken many turns. I know I had this discussion with Ken and Christian yesterday, really about the sort of the history of this and how it went from the commissioners making the decision to SEDCOR being involved and the EDAC committee and all of that. In the past, I've had some questions about whether or not we're actually following up to see that the money has been used the way it's supposed to. It's a little hard when you're giving money to a business to make those determinations based on how many jobs were created. And we have seen some of the, I think, some really good policy changes over the years. But what I've been talking to Christian and Ken about is what are some of the things, because economic development is such a broad category. What are we allowed per statute to do? What are the parameters? There's a spectrum from here to here. I think it's really instructive to look at what other counties do, and I'd be happy to and interested in looking at that. But I also think it would be interesting to know what can we do. And while we don't want to supplant county operation funds or use economic development money, because perhaps we can't, to supplant and to shore up the county budget, what I would like to do is look at what we can do to deal with some of the needs we have. I know that when I met with Joya, there was sort of a look at what the statute says about what we can do with it. And it's pretty broad about money going to nonprofits. So in the past, I know we've given money to cities, nonprofits, startup companies, traded sector. But I would like to, as you mentioned, a work session be a great place to start. First of all, starting with Christian, letting us know what can we do, and maybe a further dive into what are we allowed to do based on, maybe we go to Business Oregon, and maybe Joya, jumps in there as well. But I would like to see what can we do, because I'm really not happy with the picking winners and losers, especially people who have been coming to the trough time after time because they know how to do this process. And a lot of the smaller businesses that really could benefit from this don't even know how the game is played. So I would like to make sure that we're really doing everything we can, and it looks like we have, to make sure everybody got word. But I never feel comfortable with just doling out taxpayer dollars willy-nilly, not that we haven't done due diligence, but I'd like to do a whole lot more on what can we do at the county level to perhaps pay for some things we need to pay for that will come under the guise legally of economic development.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is maybe two-step process, which is a review of what we can do with the money. What are the
Yeah, and I'm
parameters?
happy to work with Joy. She may already have some thoughts on that. And then between the two of us, we can reach out to the different, agencies that might have hopefully some FAQs or some additional guidance on sort of where the boundaries are. So yeah, absolutely happy to work with Joy to do that.
Okay. And then look at our work session calendar and see if we can get something on the books for the discussion of the policy. Is that something that you feel?
Is that in lieu of us taking care of what's in front of us right now?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the other part of this for me is making sure that we communicate with the applicants to tell them, hey, the board is basically pressing pause right now. We need to look at some overarching policies around how we do this.
I'd hate to delay this too much. I mean, I went through most of them. To me, 90% of them are good. There was just one that I wanted to, because my main focus was people that have received grants before.
Mm.
And that would be part of our future just work session discussions, because I think that needs to be scored very highly of whether you've received grants before in the past, and then possibly they don't even make the list. I don't want to see it a deal breaker, but it does have to be a pretty high rating. But one of them that I went through, some of these seem like that they're like, within the next month that they would need funding for the projects that they have going. So if we delay some of the ones that I'd actually want to replace, ones that I drop out would probably just end up going away and they end up finding something else to do, which I don't want to see happen.
You have contact info for everybody in terms of emails as
Yes,
well?
I do. I
So
have
maybe,
I have emails and phone numbers.
so maybe we send a quick, email. Maybe it's not a formal letter, but just say, hey, the board is still trying to hash through some of this, and it's on our radar, but we need to make sure that I think I'm looking for consistency. It's really easy when, like during COVID, and we had all of this ARPA money, you're responsive, you're responding to a crisis, and we had very sort of clear parameters of, water, sewer infrastructure. Well, all of that's critical. Doesn't matter what city, it's all critical. Where I feel like we get hung up are these sort of proactive economic development, injecting money into the county. But at the end of the day, we have in the back of our mind, is this really a good use of taxpayer money? Because it doesn't matter where the money came from, whether it's fees or taxes or sin taxes or whatever you want to call it, it's still public money. So it seems like we've had this pattern of sort of getting hung up on that part over the past 3 years since I've been here. And I just want to make sure that we're consistent. So you're saying, yes, work session, but let's do it quickly.
Yes, very quickly. Because one of the ones that I'm not going to throw them out right now, because I actually need to I was going to at least ask to delay this one more week, because I would like to reach out to one of the applicants to see if I replaced one of them, that they actually are still, it's such a quick project that they need the money for, that they may have gone somewhere else. And I wanted to see if they still needed that funding. And I was actually going to ask them because they only requested part of it when they could have requested full
Mhm.
for
I
the
know who you're
category that they're
talking about.
in.
Mhm.
And so I'd like to talk to them personally if they're still on board with this, but I have questions, but if we can at least take care of this within the next 2 weeks, I hate delaying
Mhm.
these because it just drags on and things change rapidly.
Next. What is next week? It's not the 1st, the 25th.
And just, I guess, so both of you guys are aware, I'm by next week, after I would talk to the one applicant, I'm ready to actually make a decision on what's in front of us if we really want to have a better in-depth conversation about funding, grant funding going forward from this.
Okay.
So I'm within one person or one application of knowing what I would like to do.
If we do a work session in a week, is that enough time for you to sort of get some?
I would really hear from Chloe as well, but
Okay.
sure, I mean, we could do that. But I will be, if we were gonna do a work session next week, I would be virtual because our annual county council
Oh.
conference is next Thursday and Friday.
Okay.
But I could certainly go virtually and George and I could work out,
Mhm.
get more information.
Okay.
I don't know what your schedule will allow
I
for
can-
next week, but we can make that happen.
I can make that happen.
Let's see, hang on just a second. Yeah, it
that the-
doesn't look like we
That's the
have
25th, is that
anything-
correct?
Doesn't look like we have a work session until the 1st, so that should be okay. Commissioner Starrett, does that work for you?
Yes, I hope we can have some information so at least we know how far we can go on one side or the other of this. That would be important.
So July 25th, next Thursday.
Next
I will
Thursday.
have, what I heard was review of statute, so we understand what's,
Yeah.
okay,
You know, your contacts and.
Yep.
mine, so
Okay.
See if we can come up with a framework of outline of what the
Policy.
options are.
And I also have some information from other counties already.
Yeah,
as I
great.
started doing that work. Okay.
Okay,
Anything else? All right, thank
I
you.
think so. Thank you, Joy.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Thank you
Joya.
very much.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, item I, other business. I1 is consideration of approval of change order number 1 to an agreement between Yamhill County and Roy Hook Construction LLC for the 2024 Albertson Road Pavement Repair Project, Board Order 24-80, for an increase of $3,991.25 for additional pilot car services and $27,643 for increased pavement repair bid quantities in the total amount of $161,926.25. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Any questions, discussion? Commissioner?
Yes, Chair. And I wanted to check, I figured, Kit, you had the inside story on this. In terms of these change orders, it's always a little, it always is a little concerning when we get a change order. And it's just the assumption that we're going to go ahead and approve it. But I'm wondering about the question about the pilot car and the additional pavement repair and the original bid amount. Can you give us some information on why that wasn't even a factor, or what wasn't considered, and now we're being asked for this?
Yep, Mark's here and he'll give you the rundown on it. But basically, this was when they bid this out, they were the lowest bidder by far, knowing that there was going to be possible add-ons, and we're actually still below the second lowest bidder. So Mark will give you more detail on it.
Good morning.
Morning.
So I'll start with the pilot car. So when the project started, as construction got going on, we realized how close the construction was getting to the other lane and even going into the other lane. So we thought we needed to control the speed of cars as well as the direction they're going. In fact, some areas we had a detour into the shoulder area So hence, that's why the pilot car. Now, the other areas that we had dig outs, when we actually got there and looked at the construction, we could see the subgrade underneath the pavement above, and we needed to increase the size of the dig outs, but we didn't increase the depth. So hence, we saved some costs on the subgrade stabilization bid item, which some people call over X. Hence, we had a net cost to the change order. Does that answer your questions, Commissioner?
Yes, makes sense. Thank you, Mark.
So the pilot car, was that our call in terms of safety?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good idea. Albertson Road.
The nasty one.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Thank you. Was there a
Thank
motion
you.
to approve?
Thanks, Mark.
Commissioner Johnston?
Yep.
Moved approval. Any further discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. Item I2 is consideration of approval to adopt the 2020, should that say 2024? 2023? I think we're off by a year today. Maybe not.
It was actually written in 2023.
Okay.
We just had a little delay of getting it adopted, so I kept it as 2023, but
Okay.
we could change it to 2024.
So the 2023 Coordinated Human Services Transportation Plan. And we have and welcome Director Cynthia Thompson today. Did you want to do sort of a brief run through of this item?
I gave you a lot of information to read and I'm a long memo, so I'll just give you the brief version. Every 3 years, I get a mix. Some of ours are 5 years and some are 3 years, but I think it's last one we did was 2019, is that right? Sorry. Anyway, doesn't matter. There's a rule that we develop a plan that's called the Transportation and Human Services Coordinated Plan. And the purpose of the plan is to ensure that transit agencies are knowing what other services are out there, and it's focused more on human service programs. And so we have, when at the required time have done these plans every 3 to 5 years. I know why I can't remember which one it is, but anyway, it's in your notes somewhere. So we started working on this actually quite a long time ago, but we got delayed for various reasons, and it would have come to you sooner. That's why it's the 2023. But we were well, I won't go into all that, but the bottom line is the Kittleson and Associates was the vendor, and there's a slide presentation in your packet that gives you a kind of a summary, but the purpose of it is to really just minimize duplication, identify gaps in service, see if there's any unmet needs, look at all the different transportation providers, what they're doing, and then set goals for what kind of services you'd like to have. If you look at, I think the highlight, if you go to page 10 of the slideshow in your packet, there's that gives you they conducted a lot of surveys, talked to many agencies, talked to our neighboring providers, had several meetings over the course of the planning of this, and all of that detail is in your packet. But the surveys indicate the three most significant needs are obviously medical appointments, employment, shopping, social service types of things, lack of weekend service, and then a need for increased frequency. All of these things also have been identified in our transit development plan and in our state transportation improvement plan. So it's not like a big surprise that this is what is desired. And it is actually part of our plans, and we have been working towards it. Obviously, we've had some challenges since COVID with labor force, having enough drivers, and then all of the supply chain issues for buses. So that has delayed some of the projects that we had originally planned, and then increases in costs. But this plan is a good kind of augments our transit development plan, because we have to update them every few years, and then it's an opportunity for us to make sure that we're aware of all the services that are out there, and that we're coordinating in the best way that we can. If you go to slide 15, the highest priority strategies are obviously to sustain the service that we already have, our fixed route, our demand response, and commuter service. And then, of course, improve it in any way that we can. And they have a list of other things, but I won't go into all of that. Let's see, what else can I tell you? I mean, that's basically the purpose of it. I think that the consultants did a good job. We had a lot of outreach, had several meetings with all the various senior and disabled programs, providers, and I would recommend that you adopt the plan, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
And
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve?
so moved.
There's no further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Great, motion passes. Thank you. And then item I3 is consideration of approval to adopt the 2024 Yamhill County Transit Title 9. No,
6.
6. Oh my gosh, me and my numbers today. 6, Civil Rights and Limited English Proficiency Plan.
So this one is fairly simple. We do this every 3 years, and it should have come to you sooner, but the reason it was delayed is because we were hoping we were going to be able to go give some presentations to some Spanish-speaking PTA groups, but it took a really long time, and we just never were getting a response, so we decided to take another approach. The purpose of the Title VI plan is obviously to make sure that we're not discriminating against any group, and that there's a lot of requirements for us to place notices, have ways people can complain, have all that information. We have information posted on our buses. We have it at our facilities that basically give people the information that if in any way we are discriminating against any group based on race, religion, gender, et cetera, that people know how to let us know that we're doing that and to make sure that we're following the requirements. Both of these plans are required plans for transit agencies to have to seek federal and state funding. So what we ended up doing, and we still will go out and speak to groups, in Yamhill County, I think there's about 15% of the population are Spanish speaking. So we get all of our information translated into Spanish. So we have all of our materials are in Spanish. We also offer translation services. So if someone calls and wants to get bus information, they speak any language, hundreds of, doesn't matter what language. We use a service called Certified Languages, and then they can actually get a person to talk to translate and ask any questions they have about our services. But by law, we have to, if we have a percentage, I think it's higher than 15%, or maybe it's 12, you have to get your materials translated into that language. So that's why we do Spanish, because it is the largest one. So this one is a requirement and will be for us to get federal funding. And we did just create a survey and some additional outreach to make sure that we're actually reaching the community. And we created a QR code, shared it with some of the human service agents who put on their website, so that if people have questions, they can just go there. It'll take them directly to our site and be able to, and they can fill out the survey and let us know if we're doing a good job or not, or if they have questions, et cetera.
Great. Thank you. Commissioners, any questions on this item?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, I will move approval of item I3. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Great, motion passes. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Okay, item I4 is discussion on filling the county treasurer position left vacant after the resignation of the former treasurer. And this was added by Commissioner Starrett to the agenda.
Yes, Chair. As you know, the last day of the Budget Committee, Compensation Committee discussions, our elected treasurer, Chris Bledsoe, resigned her position effective immediately. So that left us without a treasurer. Now, just to put a little bit of context to that, we do have a finance manager Mike Barnhart, who does the lion's share of that function. And also the board sets policy on investment policy based on what the requirements are by the state of Oregon. So there really isn't I don't see this as a political position, but it is an elected position. So that left us without a treasurer, and our finance manager had picked up the duties that our treasurer had been doing. And so also subsequent to that, the resigned treasurer then withdrew her name from the ballot for November, because this is on the ballot for November. And then the filing period opened on June 21st and will now remain open until August 27th, leaving anyone who would like to file for that position to do so by August 27th. In the meantime, we have a finance manager who's dealing with quarterlies, end of fiscal year responsibilities, and is now being asked to do things like a meeting that was supposed to be held yesterday, the Local Investment Advisory Committee. And I reached out to him and I asked him how that was going to go. He said, well, I'll be doing a report as per required, but I really am not going to be able to do the level of meetings and things that I have typically with the board. So I approached our administrator and I said, I think we need to appoint someone and fill this position because it's going to be vacant until January. And at this point, I also reached out to a woman who was on our investment advisory committee, is also a member of our planning commission, and has quite a number of impressive credentials around advanced public funds management. And she is Paulette Alexandria, and has in the past, she was in the race against the former treasurer, has become conversant with what goes on in the treasurer's office, and also has met with Mike Barnhart. And I look at the credentials and I know how important it is when I like to think in terms of succession planning, and I want to make sure we get a whole lot better at that. We did have a deputy clerk who was ready to pick up when our previous clerk resigned. And that put us in a position where we had someone who knew a little bit about what was going on. I also think it's important that we realize that these are not positions that, while anyone can file for them, it does require a modicum of some advanced certifications or acknowledgement of the complexities of investments, government investments. So I bring this to you because I think it's important that we get somebody who will be serving as the treasurer, appointed, until such time as someone is elected. And again, anyone can file to run on, hopefully it will be someone who is qualified and not just somebody who is looking at it as an open position and a political position. Because I think it's clear, I think our former treasurer did a wonderful job. And unfortunately that left us kind of in a difficult position. So I want to read a little bit about her qualifications, and that is Paulette Alexandria has been on the Investment Advisory Committee. She is a member of the Oregon Association of County Treasurers and Finance Officers, was on the Marion County Planning Commission, is on the Yamhill County Planning Commission, was on Marion County Soil and Water, also has advanced certified public funds investment manager credentials, Association of Public Treasurers of the US and Canada, certified government investment officer, Government Investment Officers Association. I think she is highly qualified, has had an interest in what goes on in the county because she's been invested on a number of positions. So I would like to recommend that we appoint Paulette Alexandria, and then anyone who wants to file can do so by August 27th. But we do have somebody who would then be functioning as the treasurer who doesn't really need a whole lot of onboarding. And that would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just to make sure I'm clear, you've spoken with Paulette and she is amenable to being appointed for the interim.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I've seen, Mike has a lot on his plate. And so that was something that the meeting that was postponed or canceled yesterday was a bit of a concern. I think my other concern is that there are a lot of rules and restrictions around what we do with our investments in terms of the accounts that we have money in and when they w- the restrictions and the returns and all of that stuff. It's very complicated. And we saw in our audit and some of the things that we were looking at that maybe some of those funds were not, they had fallen sort of below the restrictions or the rules. And so there's a lot more to this job than just managing investments and watching the stock market. I mean, it's quite extensive. So I would agree that we would benefit by having an additional person watching that and monitoring that and making sure that the county's investments are protected. Commissioner, any thoughts?
If this was an elected position, I'd be hiring it out to one of the 5 or 6 different financial companies
Right.
throughout the county.
Yeah.
But it is, and we do need to have somebody on the interim, so I'd be okay with it.
Okay. Commissioner Sterrett, did you make a formal motion?
I did not, but I will. I move to appoint Paulette Alexandria to be the treasurer of Yamhill County and subsequent to any elections that occur in November.
That sound good?
Yeah, she would fill out the remainder of the treasurer's term, which would end at the end of the year. We don't know if anyone will file. So if no one files and this position remains vacant, then the board would need to take some other
Further.
action after that time to reappoint or appoint someone else, or leave it with Mike, who is our deputy treasurer. But yes, I think the motion's sufficient for these
Okay.
purposes.
Okay. And Commissioner Sterrett, I want to make sure I'm also understanding correctly. Paulette met with Mike?
She met with Mike when she ran initially for the position,
Okay.
and she did serve on the local investment advisory committee.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, motion passes. And we thank Paulette for serving as the interim county treasurer. That brings us to our public hearing. So we are going to take a quick 5-minute break. Thanks for coming. We'll take a quick 5 minutes and then we will jump into our public hearing. Thank you. All right, we are coming back into our meeting. It is 10:52. I want to make sure, Commissioner Sterrett, you can hear us okay? Good, okay. So we will come back at item J, which is our public hearing. J1 is docket M-05-24, an appeal of the planning director's approval of an irrigation reservoir to supply water for a vineyard. The applicant is Red Hills Farm LLC. The appellant is Karen Hansen. And I will go ahead and open the hearing and call for any abstentions by members of the board. Okay. Do any of the parties object to the jurisdiction of this board to hear the matter before it? Okay.
You want to address it now or later?
We need to address it now, I believe.
Yeah, I believe it would be best to address it now and perhaps have Mr. Pfeiffer testify about his motion for dismissal and then have the opponent's attorney also give testimony on the motion for dismissal.
Okay, so we have a formal motion for dismissal on the
Yes,
table? Okay.
and I've also written a response memo related to the motion for dismissal, and I think Mr. Pfeiffer can start by explaining.
Okay, so if you could just please state your name and address for the record, and
Sure.
then please proceed.
Chair Bershauer, members of the commission, my name is Steve Pfeiffer. I'm a land use attorney in Portland, 1120 Northwest Cooch, Portland, Oregon, 97204. Here today on behalf of Red Hills Farm. And as a land use attorney, I've done a lot of hearings over the years. And this is the first time I can think of where your question, which comes up in every hearing and typically just passes by quickly, caught my attention, but I do have to come up and just clarify. I filed a motion to dismiss on the 9th, which is to dismiss the appeal, as Ken points out. And the basis for that in short order, and I was going to address it during my testimony as well, but I'll summarize it now. And I'm not asking you to make a decision now, certainly. The motion to dismiss is based on your code provision in two very clear provisions that an appeal of a decision of the planning director has to be filed within 15 days of the date of the decision. In this case, that decision was made in the form of the land use compatibility determination that's at issue in the appeal on the 25th of April was the date it was signed. It was also then mailed to me, us, the applicant, as well as other parties, the decision of approval of the Lux that's at issue here the next day on the 26th, and the record has got all that in there. If you do the math from the 25th, that appeal would need to have been filed on the 10th. If you do the math from the 26th, which is a point that Ken makes in the response to the board, that appeal would need to have been filed on the 11th, which is a Saturday. The appeal was filed on Monday, the 13th, because the office was open that day, was my suspicion, and I think Ken confirmed that in a response to the board. And I understand that, and I understand the reasoning that Ken raises there, that that's been the pattern and practice of the county, that you don't count weekends, you only count business days. And some counties have a provision in their code that says that. But where a county such as Yamhill County doesn't have that provision, and you have language that very clearly says shall be filed within 15 days of the date of the decision, and where the appellant clearly could have filed on day 6, 7, 8, 9, any number of days, that simply doesn't give an excuse or create a legal basis to accept the appeal, because it's frankly untimely by at least 2 days. So I'll leave it at that. What my motion does is essentially point out that by the terms of the county code, the appeal timeline, the last day to file the appeal, 15 days from the date of decision, was not met in this case. And the net effect of that is that Ken's decision therefore became effective on the 15th day, which would have been the 11th, when the appeal wasn't filed. And because that decision is effective with no appeal, timely appeal, it's final and beyond appeal. And because the appeal was untimely and didn't meet your code requirements, as I point out in my motion on the 9th, the board lacks jurisdiction to hear the appeal. So that's the long version of why I would come up now and say, yes, that's a point I've made.
Okay.
And again, I'm not asking you to rule on it now by any stretch, but this allows me to present it now and you'll take it into consideration.
Okay,
Any
great, thank you.
questions? I'm happy to-
Commissioners, does that make sense in terms of the motion to dismiss? Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. So I suppose now I would call for anyone opposed to the motion to dismiss?
So the rules of procedure, yeah, allow for you to do, let me quote it here. Inquire the audience whether there are any objections to jurisdiction, and if such objections are received, conduct such further inquiries necessary to determine the question.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, Greg Hathaway, representing Karen Hansen, who's the appellant with regards to Mr. Friday's interpretation. I'd like to give a little background about how this appeal was filed to address Mr. Pfeiffer's motion to dismiss. And I know that Mr. Friday has presented to you a memorandum that describes what happened in terms of how he provided notice to all parties, including the appellant in this case, and described the last 35 years of county interpretation and practice and how the county computes time for purposes of filing an appeal. But let me just kind of give you some factual background, because Mr. Friday did issue his decision on April 26th. And then by law, he was required to provide a notice of that decision to all the parties, including Ms. Hansen, who's the appellant in this case. And the notice specifically provided that the appeal deadline was at 5 p.m. on May 13th in big bold letters. And that was provided again to all the parties. So Ms. Hansen filed her appeal by 5 o'clock on May 13th, exactly as the notice provided. The county accepted her appeal, accepted her filing fee, and then the county scheduled this hearing for today. So the practice that's happened here in this case is consistent with what Mr. Friday described for you the last 35 years of how the county has interpreted its code and the past practice of how it has computed time. And it's consistent with what's happened here in this case. Your board has the authority to interpret your own code, and based upon the past practice and interpretation, it's our position that what Mr. Friday did in identifying May 13th at 5 p.m. as the appeal deadline is a correct interpretation and can be supported by your board today so that this appeal can proceed on its merits. So we're respectfully requesting the board to basically adopt Mr. Friday's analysis and recommendation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other testimony? Calling for? Okay,
So at this point, you're just making a decision whether or not to terminate the hearing or not, based on the objection.
commissioners' thoughts? If you'd like, I can kick us off. Okay. I would make a motion to deny the motion to dismiss. I do think that our past practice of 35 years that is also consistent with LUBA's administrative rules on how they compute time is adequate to hear the matter. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, great. We will proceed. Is that what you need? Okay. Does any member of the board need to announce and state on the record the substance of any ex parte contact or site visits? Nope, hearing none. And now we will hear from our planning director, Ken Friday, to read the statements required by law.
Yes, Oregon law requires that persons who attend a land use hearing be advised of certain rights and duties before the hearing begins. First, with regard to the standards for approval, state law ORS 197.763 requires that we list the applicable substantive criteria that must be met in order for the county to approve the application. The standards will be listed by the county planner in a moment as part of the staff report. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the standards for approval. Second, the raise it or waive it rule. Under Oregon law, any issue that might be raised in an appeal of the county's decision in this matter must be raised before the record of this hearing is closed. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the board based on that issue. Third, and this is directed to the applicant, under ORS 197.796, failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval, again with sufficient specificity to allow the county to respond to the issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Finally, I will also note that under Oregon law, and because this is the initial evidentiary hearing on this matter, any participant, that is anyone who submits oral or written testimony during this hearing may, before the record is closed, request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. The request must be made prior to the time the chair announces that the hearing is closed.
Great, thank you. And now we have the staff report.
The parcel is approximately 26.6 acres in size and has direct access to Northeast Quarry Road. Subject property is presently unimproved. The property is in the Chehalem Mountain Groundwater Limited Area, which is regulated by the Water Resources Department. Red Hills Farm LLC originally submitted a conditional use application for establishment of a reservoir in the AF20 Ag Forestry Zone. That application went to a hearing before the Planning Commission on April 4th, 2024, and a request was made to leave the record open. During the open record period, the attorney representing Red Hills Farm submitted arguments that the reservoir fell under the definition of farm use since it was solely to support irrigation and therefore did not need conditional use approval. The definition of farm use is found in 403.12 of the county zoning ordinance, and it states in part, farm use includes the on-site construction and maintenance of equipment and facilities used for the activities described in this subsection. Since the reservoir was solely for agricultural irrigation, we agreed it was a permitted farm use. The applicant then submitted a land use compatibility statement known as a LUX and withdrew their conditional use request. Our office prepared a memo explaining the reasons for the approval, assigned the LUX, and sent out a public notice of the decision to neighboring property owners and interested parties. This decision was then appealed by Karen Hansen, who's represented today by Greg Hathaway. The review criteria is found in sections 403.02A and 403.12E of the Yamhill County Zoning Ordinance and Oregon Revised Statute 215.203. Lastly, I'd like to note that many of the concerns that were submitted both at the Planning Commission hearing and today relate to the protection of groundwater. I need to note that the Planning Department does not regulate groundwater because the legislature directed the Water Resources Department through ORS 536.220 to be the sole agency in charge of Oregon's water resources. So we will pass on these concerns that we've collected to the Water Resources Department. And that ends this portion of the staff report.
Great, thank you. And now we will move to the applicant's case. And first up, I have the applicant, who is Jason Tosh from Red Hills Farm.
Appellant or applicant first? I'll go.
Did I say appellant?
You said
Okay,
applicant. Yeah.
Yes, applicant first.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Jason Tosh, Vice President for Stoller Wine Group. Stoller Wine Group is owned by Bill Stoller, who also owns Red Hills Farm. It's the land holding company that we operate vineyards on. So just to clarify, we're the Stoller Wine Group. We employ 150 people in this county, growing wine grapes in the North Willamette, primarily in Yamhill County, but some in Washington County. And that Washington County portion is adjacent or contiguous with the site that in question here today that we hope to put a reservoir on. 480 planted acres in this valley, growing wine grapes for 5 different brands. We produce 140,000 cases of wine that's sold, and that's in Yamhill County at our site there in Dayton. That's sold nationally, some international, and a lot locally. We like to build vineyards that will last a very long time. And looking into the far future, irrigation and water resources will be part of the resiliency that we build into these properties. The proposed pond site is on an adjacent property that was acquired after an original purchase up in that area. The original purchase is in Washington County, where we successfully developed a reservoir in 2019 and used that water and the water resources and water rights for that first addition. Since then, we've added 86 additional acres, which we seek to put water rights on as well. All of the water in the original pond is claimed, and it's sized for, it's not big enough to go beyond the area that we started with. So that's why we seek a pond. We need more water to address these further acres. Why do we think water is necessary for vineyards? Quite a few reasons. Beyond just making good financial sense, it ensures crop health in hot years and during heat spikes, drought years. It evens the crop fruitfulness out year to year to year. Can add additional yield of half a ton per acre or more per year. Consistency. It allows you to get to a full crop 1 to 2 years earlier than without. And it helps us prepare, again, this farm for the far future. So at Quarry Road, it's a nice sloped area. There's a very nice bowl at the bottom of the property where it's shaded, not necessarily suitable for wine grape growing, but it's an ideal location for collecting surface water. And that's what we're talking about here. No groundwater, just surface water to be collected in the peak runoff months of the winter. And that would be stored for agriculture use only. Nothing but grapes at this time, but agriculture. And then we would seek water rights to cover the additional properties which currently don't have them. It will require a dam to be created out of material on the site. And that would be engineered by our engineer that we've engaged. Those plans would be submitted to the Oregon Water Resources Department for approval, and they would engage multiple resources to ensure that the dam was safe, that water resources in that area, which is a limited groundwater use area, would not affect the groundwater. Those folks that the Water Resources Department depend on are other state and federal agencies who would also review this project. It includes the DEQ, the Department of State Lands, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Army Corps of Engineers, and fire marshals as well. These are just a few of the agencies that get involved in water resource projects like this and have dramatic oversight. We would follow all of the steps required by them, as we did with our last project in the area, and only within their restrictions. The pond would be filled in the winter, and it would not affect the surrounding properties. It would only be contained within our property. It observes all setbacks, 30 feet minimum setbacks from the borders, and fits into the landscape. It'll be a pond below a beautiful vineyard that we'll have planted there to help support the larger 254 acre and growing property that we have on the site. This particular property goes to Chehalem Wines, which is a long-standing winery in the Yamhill County area that Stoller owns and operates under our wine group. And we hope to continue to grow and provide more economic development and jobs for the future of this county. So that's the basis of our reasoning. And I open I'm open to any questions or anything you may need. to
Thank
know.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Tosh? Commissioner Sterrett?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Tosh, thank you for being here. I had a question about you said that no groundwater would be used. And yet there were some concerns about creeks and what that would do, the impact to creeks and riparian areas and things like that. So I recognize that that's not considered groundwater, but I'm wondering about the just the concerns that we've heard about how that piece would impact the neighboring properties.
Okay, so yes, we're not asking to set this location of this pond inside of a running creek. Seasonal surface water, once the soils are charged up, water runs off of that hillside through swales and through this area where a pond would be built and collects in the drainage, but it's not an annual year-round creek running through there. We would only be collecting water that would be surface from excessive rainfall in the winter months that we'd be allowed to collect by the state. Typically that ends in March, but they have different parameters by site, and we follow those rules. Any other potential water would be collected over high flows in the winter as well, and but never collected in the summer. There's no way we won't have a system designed or built to collect any year-round running water or pump a well into the lake. That would be illegal and we wouldn't do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, there's no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so bear with me. Some of these are a little confusing because it was in opposition to the motion to dismiss. So I think I'm on track here. So this is now testimony in support of the applications. So we have Mr. Pfeiffer is next.
Chair Burschauer, members of the commission, Steve Pfeiffer again. A procedural point. My experience has been that where there's an application before you, the applicant's the first person to testify, and people then in turn are allowed to follow and respond to what the applicant has. Where there's an appeal filed, as in this case, my experience is the appellant goes first. And one of the reasons for that is so that the applicant, and frankly staff, can respond to what the appellant is arguing about why Mr. Friday's decision should be overturned. We did not see a particularly coherent or clear appeal that raised point by point issues that are primarily very narrow and legal, which is whether the activity that Jason just described constitutes a farm use and therefore is allowed as a right, as Mr. Friday found in the Lux. I need to be able to respond to what the appellant says today in the hearing. And so I either need to be able to defer my testimony in support of Ken's decision, which also is set forth in a letter that I submitted yesterday in the record. Or unfortunately, I would have to ask that the record be left open so that I could respond later over the next 7 days, because otherwise I won't have a chance to respond because I don't know what they're going to say. And so I'd like to not leave the record open and keep this thing alive if I don't have to.
So in our process, there is a rebuttal by the applicant as we go through. And
Well, if I get
you get a final rebuttal.
let me put it this way. If I can be assured that I'll be able to respond after the appellants have stated their position,
Mhm.
then I'm fine with that.
And even
So
if that's still not sufficient, you can also.
Oh, yeah, no,
request
that'll be fine. I don't want to have to,
Okay.
again, I don't want to ask to leave the record open
Okay.
unnecessarily because it just drags things out.
Okay,
So that's fine. Then I'll defer my comments till
okay. Sounds good.
post appellant testimony. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you. The next up is Doug Rux.
Chair,
Is-
Mr. Hathaway wants to go first.
Are you wanting to testify in support of the application? Okay, then I misunderstood your.
Maybe I need to fill it out.
Okay. Yeah, and like I said, it's confusing because we had that first step, so. You support the appeal. Okay. So we're not quite there yet. I
Okay.
apologize, Mr.
That's
Hathaway.
okay. Good exercise.
Yeah. Uh, Well, since it's not, these are marked differently, so why don't I just do this? Why don't I just call for any other testimony in support of the application to have the reservoir, if that makes sense? So if you're online and would like to testify, please raise your virtual hand. If you're here in the audience, please come forward. Okay. Hearing none, we will go to the appellant's case. So in that case, that would be Mr. Hathaway to start us off.
Again, Madam Chair, members of the commission, Greg Hathaway representing appellant Karen Hansen. Thanks for the opportunity to present our case today for your consideration. I think it's important at the very beginning to have the commission understand that Ms. Hansen doesn't oppose this proposed reservoir or oppose the project that's being submitted by Red Hills. What Ms. Hansen is concerned about is that the county's code provides a process for the review of these kind of projects, these water reservoirs. And that process is by conditional use permit. And that's how this whole project started, because Mr. Friday and the staff advised, in this case, Red Hills, the applicant, that they had to apply for a conditional use permit to be able to get approval from the county for their proposed water reservoir. And you've heard today from Mr. Tosh exactly what that reservoir is all about and what it's supposed to serve. And again, Ms. Hansen doesn't oppose that. She's concerned about process, and that's what this whole appeal is about, is process. And I'll go through in a few minutes and explain exactly what we mean by that. But basically what's happened is that the applicant then filed an application for a conditional use permit. And in your code, if you file an application for a conditional use permit, you have to meet certain criteria. Like you have to comply with the comprehensive plan. You've got to identify all of the potential adverse impacts that might be created by your proposed water reservoir. And then there's a hearing in front of the Planning Commission so that there's a public process to evaluate the application for the public and people living next door to the property where the project's going to be able to testify about their concerns about what that potential impact could be and mean on them. And the Planning Commission held a hearing on this. And then, and people got to testify. And then the applicant requested a continuance of that hearing and that proceeding. And after that, then the applicant spoke with Mr. Friday and advised Mr. Friday that they don't have to go through a conditional use permit process, that the county code allows this proposed use by right. And you don't have to go through a public process to evaluate what kind of impacts, for example, this project might create on adjacent property or even downstream. So what happened is Mr. Friday then rendered an interpretation of your code and basically said to the applicant, you don't have to go through that conditional use permit process. Then Mr. Friday advised the Water Resources Department that this use was allowed by right, and therefore it was compatible with the county's code. And that was what was presented to the Water Resources Department. That's what you just heard from the applicant. So as you know, the appellant had the right to appeal, and that's exactly what Ms. Hansen did. But I think to start with, I just want to emphasize a few things about this appeal. Again, this appeal isn't about opposing this project. It's about what the county's process requires in these kind of cases. It requires a conditional use permit process. The second thing is that if you were to approve this appeal, it doesn't deny the project. It simply requires the project to go through the conditional use permit process. The third part is under ORS 197-763, parties have the right to request a continuance. Mr. Pfeiffer just referred to, he didn't want a continuance. We want a continuance because we just received last night his memorandum. I've had an opportunity to read it, and I'm going to comment on that here this morning. But we want the opportunity to have at least a 7-day continuance so that we can respond specifically to Mr. Pfeiffer's memo. So under 197-763, it's our understanding, and County Council and Mr. Friday can comment, is that we believe that's by right. And so we would respectfully request that we be given the opportunity for a 7-day continuance. Let me talk about what's really in dispute here, because it really shapes how you make a decision on this appeal. Again, the appellant is not challenging the decision or challenging the proposal. It's challenging the process. And what Mr. Friday is saying and what Mr. Pfeiffer is saying in his memo is that because this water reservoir is for farm use, the water reservoir fits within the definition of farm use in your code. And because it fits within the definition of farm use as a permitted use, it's allowed by right. And Mr. Pfeiffer actually goes so far as to say it's an outright permitted use. And what's the consequence or significance of that? It's the applicant's position that because it's recognized as a use within the farm use definition, that it's allowed by right, and therefore the county's conditional use permit process does not apply. It's allowed by right. It doesn't require some other process to allow this water reservoir to occur. And that's where the disagreement is in this case, as to whether or not this proposed water reservoir is in fact permitted, but does the conditional use permit process still come into play? And the answer is yes. In fact, it's unequivocal. Because if you look at Mr. Pfeiffer's memo from last night, one of his first bullet points is to refer to section 403.02 permitted uses in the AF20 district. I think it's also important to recognize that this is not exclusive farm use land. This is AF20 land, zoned AF20 by Yamhill County. But under permitted uses in the AF20, which farm use is an example of a permitted use, there's a big qualifier governing permitted uses in the AF20 district. I'll read it. In the agricultural forestry district, the following uses shall be permitted, subject to, subject to the standards and limitations set forth in subsection 403.11, which is inapplicable here, but subject to any other applicable provisions of this ordinance. So the uses identified, including farm use, clearly permitted by right, not by right, but permitted, but subject to any other applicable provisions of this code. So the question is, what other provisions in this code might apply to this proposed water reservoir? Well, that other provision applicable is the conditional use permit process that's specifically identified in the AF 20 district. And that's at section 40304 of the code, which identifies specifically those items, those uses that are required to go through a conditional use process, even if they're permitted, which this is, but subject to any other applicable provisions. Well, the applicable provision here is that conditional use language in your AF 20 district specifically identifies water reservoirs as requiring a conditional use permit. And it's unequivocal. It's all water reservoirs. It doesn't exclude farm use water reservoirs, all water reservoirs. So under your code, a water reservoir is a water reservoir is a water reservoir. Doesn't matter if it's a farm use reservoir that might be permitted, but that's still subject to this conditional use permit process. And if the county would have wanted to exclude farm use water reservoirs from having to go through a conditional use permit process, it would have said so, but it didn't. And I have to assume that the reason it didn't exclude any proposed water reservoir is that I think most of us in this room would understand that when a water reservoir is proposed on property, and we agree that it's for a very good purpose. But I think everybody in this room would recognize that when you propose a water reservoir on property, that could create impacts that need to be addressed by the county through the conditional use permit process. That's what the conditional use permit process is all about, is to evaluate impacts that are created by proposals like this proposal. And I understand Mr. Friday's comment and even the applicant's comment that now that this is at the Water Resources Department, there'll be other state agencies reviewing this proposed water reservoir through the state process. But the county has its own process, and the county can't defer its questions and its issues for its property owners to the state when in fact it has its own process that any applicant is required to follow to allow the public to participate. And what's interesting about this, and kind of ironic, that's where this whole thing started, is the county took the position that they had to apply for a conditional use permit. And they applied for a conditional use permit. There was a hearing, there was testimony. The hearing was continued. Then the director's interpretation that basically said they don't have to go through a CUP process. It's by right. That's where the disagreement is whether or not your code specifically requires this proposal to go through a conditional use permit process. And the key language, again, to support our position, to support our argument, is that in the AF 20 district, this proposed water reservoir is a permitted use, but it's subject to other applicable provisions. And there could be nothing clearer in your code that if you're proposing a water reservoir in the AF 20 district, you got to get a conditional use permit. And that's all this appeal is about. It's all about process, to require them to go through the process they started. We just like for them to finish what they started. There's other people in this room, I think, that will probably support this position, that the public deserves the county to hold a process that will clearly evaluate what's being proposed here. Again, not necessarily objecting to the proposal, but having the opportunity to talk about potential impacts, recommend potential conditions of approval before this project can go forward. With that, I have no other comments, and I'm going to ask the appellant, Karen Hansen, to speak next. Then after her, Doug Rux, if you're okay with that order. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Excuse me, thank you. I just want to ask Ken for a point of clarification. And it may be irrelevant because if we continue this, but if the appeal is upheld, it doesn't just revert back to a conditional use. There would have to be a whole new
They'd have-
process.
They'd have to resubmit for
Okay.
the conditional use, correct?
Were there, did you offer any conditions or did it not get that far?
Yeah, I did not represent Ms. Hanson in that first proceeding.
Okay.
But the hearing was continued, and since I wasn't there, I'm not sure exactly about what that testimony is. Ms. Hanson is going to testify
Okay.
next, and she might be able to answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioners, any questions? Nope.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Karen?
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
Good morning. If you can state your name and address for the record, we'd appreciate it.
I'm Karen Hansen. My address is 17,000 Northeast Slope Lane, Newburgh, Oregon. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Karen Hansen. I live on Chehalem Mountain in Yamhill County, inside of the groundwater limited area. I am a civil engineer licensed in water resources. I'm mostly retired, except for a small contract writing public facilities findings for land use decisions, including conditional use permits at the municipal level. I volunteer on water-related projects on Chehalem Mountain within the groundwater limited area. It was in this capacity that I first got involved in this project, testifying at the public hearing for the conditional use permit that the planning staff had required, which was held on April 4th of this year. I did not testify against the project. I was not and am not opposed. I simply intended to address the lack of information provided. I did not believe that there was enough information for either the planning staff or the public to find for or against the project. I requested that information at the hearing. The applicant asked for the record to be left open for 2 weeks and submitted a memo from a hydrogeologist. I was in the process of reviewing that memo when I learned that the CUP had been withdrawn and the reservoir permitted, with no legal findings addressing potential impacts and disregard for significant public input provided at the April 4th hearing. I have submitted a list of 25 neighbors who support this appeal. Many of them testified at the April 4th hearing. Some were unable to attend the hearing today as it's scheduled during the workday. As you can imagine, I was very disturbed by the results of the interpretation. My experience told me to expect something different. I am a resident of Yamhill County. Yamhill County has adopted a zoning ordinance that identifies reservoirs as uses that require a conditional use permit. My experience tells me that this is for a good reason. Any kind of reservoir has the potential to impact surrounding properties, groundwater, surface water, riparian habitat, the list goes on. This reservoir is proposed in an area where the water supply that Yamhill County residents rely on is precarious. Groundwater and surface water connect. This would collect water from drainage off of properties within the watershed that the applicant does not own. And it is rumored to be large enough to hold millions of gallons of water. I can only say rumored because no design was submitted. I requested a hydraulic and hydrologic analysis at the public hearing. This is a standard engineering analysis. I review these for land use decisions frequently. It was not provided. I do not oppose this reservoir. I simply want an appropriate public process which identifies the potential adverse impacts and respects the input of those most likely to be impacted. A conditional use process is a conditional use permit is the process that enables staff to write conditions which detail and require mitigation of those impacts. I believe it is the county's responsibility to provide that process and publish legal findings. The county is the local authority. Residents, including the owners of the property where the reservoir is proposed, rely on the county to exercise that authority. Therefore, I am appealing the planning staff's interpretation, which resulted in approving the reservoir with no assessment of and no legal findings conditioning mitigation of potential adverse impacts to Yamhill County residents. This sets a precedent which creates significant risk for the residents of Yamhill County. Thank you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions I can.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Mrs. Hanson?
What delayed your appeal to the very last minute?
Oh, thank you very much. You know, I'm a volunteer and I do work and I do have other responsibilities. When I received the notice, I had to do a significant amount of work and study to determine that I would have a firm standing for an appeal. After I had accomplished that, I had to find an attorney to hire. I also sought support from an expert who I'm familiar with. This took time. And that's always the case in these processes, the deadlines, and that you just have to go as fast as you can. And it's not the only thing you're focusing on. So that's why.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
Looks like Doug Rux is up next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been a while since I've been in front of you.
Yeah.
You probably thought you'd never see me again, but I'm like an old pair of boots. I got to the back of the closet, I put them on. So Doug Rux from the Rux Group LLC, 15532 Southwest Thrasher Way in Sherwood, Oregon, 97140. So just a little bit of background on myself, because Ms. Hanson said she hired an expert. So I've had 38 and a half years experience dealing with land use in the state of Oregon. Some of you know I recently semi-retired back at the end of 2023. During my 10-year practice, I've collaborated and coordinated with counties, Lane County, Douglas County, Washington County, Clackamas County, Marion County, Polk County, and Yamhill County on land use actions. I've also worked for the city of Springfield, Council of Governments, which is defunct, doesn't exist. So I was a planner for all the cities in Douglas County, circuit rider planner, city of Tualatin, city of Salem, and most recently the city of Newburgh. I concur with Mr. Hathaway's statements that he provided to you. It's interesting, we were brought together as we went through this process. And so Ms. Hanson engaged me back in the conditional use process. And so I provided her information and guidance of things to consider. When Mr. Hathaway was brought on board, our first meeting, the question was, Doug, what's your assessment of this? And so I outlined it to him. And the irony was, our assessment was the same. The CUP process was the correct process to go through, and that process had been initiated until it took what I will call a 180-degree turn through an interpretation process. So in your code, YC 403.040S, it states that water impoundments and reservoirs must obtain a conditional use approval, and Mr. Hathaway addressed that. Also, and there were some communications that occurred between Ms. Hanson and the county planning staff. And so YC 403.01, the purpose, and I will read this, the purpose of the agricultural forest district is to identify and protect lands designated as agriculture, forestry, large holding in the comprehensive plan that are a mixture of agriculture and forest management operations and other uses which are compatible with such operations. Properties in the agriculture forest district are primarily foothill and ridgetop holdings above the flat terrace and valley floor, commercial agricultural areas, and below the contiguous timberlands of the coast range.
this is the important part. Next. Uses of land and water which do not provide for a sustained production of crops, livestock, and forest products, or for the proper conservation of soil and water, and fish and wildlife habitat shall be limited or prohibited. So when I was doing my analysis, I looked at this information and said, the county has already gone through that process, and that farm is permitted, but you have a conditional use process to go through for a water impoundment and a reservoir. So that kind of addresses this issue about soil and water resources and fish and wildlife habitat. I agree with Mr. Hathaway on YC 403.02002 on the permitted uses and that phrase and any applicable provisions of this ordinance. In the county code and in state statute, there's the phrase current employment of land. I think this is important. If you go and look at the county's GIS site, which is a side note, I kind of wonder, why is the GIS only available between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday? I was kind of like, what about us who do work at night and on weekends?
Working on that.
Yeah, it's been very frustrating.
How do you bring that up?
Yeah, it's been very frustrating. But as you go through that, this property, if you look at the recent aerials, and so this is the data that's directly on the GIS site, is that it's not farmed. It's not currently employed as farmland. It's trees. And if you really zero in, you'll see that those trees are being harvested. You can see the log decks. You can see the trees on the ground. You can see the logging equipment that is on that particular site. So what would be the impacts based upon the county staff and its issued interpretation? For the AF20 land, in a similar type situation, it means AF20, everybody by right, if it was farm use, could have a reservoir. If you had a spring, that's theoretically, it could be up to every AF20 property. Again, if it had a surface water source or a water source that was reaching the surface. There were some references in the material of the Brentmar versus Jackson County case, and I would say you should disregard that. It's not applicable. That case was for EFU land, and this land that we're talking about is AF20. It's not the same. Then through interpretation processes, and in my practice, we are always kind of working on, it's a twist of a phrase. It could be a punctuation issue. It could be a single word. But I always get cautious when we do interpretations that kind of look like we are changing code language without following the proper process to change code language. I'm not sure if that's actually happening here, but it's always a concern that I take when I was looking at interpretations. I looked at the National Wetland Inventory. The county data doesn't have anything in its GIS, so I went to the National NWI site. This artesian spring is identified as a riverine wetland. There's been no mention of that in the CUP process that was occurring. There's been no mention in this process, but I indicate that if you look at your own data in your GIS system, this area is being logged, and where that channel, and we heard earlier, there's some swales and so forth, is that area is being logged. Equipment's been running over it. Was there ever any approvals to impact a wetland? Don't know, because that artesian spring that goes through the property discharges it down into Little Hills Canyon Creek. Ms. Hanson kind of brought up the issues about biological impacts, and that's something that I also looked at. And I couldn't find in that CUP process detailed information about impacts of downstream volumes, groundwater recharge impacts, reduced stream flow, impacts on aquatic habitat, and vegetation. Through the CUP process, you could be looking at all of this. If it's just determined or interpreted to be it's an outright permitted use, you don't get to look at any of those. Endangered species was another piece that I looked at. Never saw any information in the land use information. The soils was another piece that I looked at. And in this, the staff report at the time noted that it was a class 4 soils, but that was only in the northeast corner of the site. Basically, the balance of the site was class 2. But this is all Laurelwood silt loam. And Mr. Tosh mentioned that they have an engineer who'll be looking at it. It's like, well, typically, I was schooled as a hydrologist in my undergrad before I got a master's degree in planning. Is silt loam is really not stuff that you use to build a dam. You want material that's a tighter, more clay in order to create that water impoundment. And again, so back in that CUP process that was terminated and then moving over here to this interpretation, just outright, you would never be able to look at any of that at the county level. An easy analysis. Through a CUP, you have to go through the economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences analysis. If you interpret it, it's like it's just an outright permitted use, which your code doesn't say outright, it just says permitted. In this case, it's permitted through a conditional use process. That process would go away. It would not occur. Then there are other elements that if you go through the CUP process, you look at, because in the application at the time said that they were going to use it for the irrigation, and it was mentioned today for vineyards that essentially are to the east. Well, you have to cross Little Hells Canyon Creek. What's the infrastructure that's going to be required to get the water to go uphill to the east? There's no information. The CUP process would allow all of that to be evaluated and looked at. The hydrologic study, that's been brought up. What are the impacts there? So my summary, when I looked at it and I'm responded to my client with information, is that the CUP is required by YC 403.04 subsection S. And it's my opinion that the county interpretation based on what was submitted by Mr. Pfeiffer is incorrect, is that your code, and it's been the practice in your code, is that it requires a conditional use process. And again, my client is not looking to say you can't have a water impoundment in a reservoir. It's the correct process that you have to go through in order to obtain that. And we believe they started down that correct path before there was a change and a correction.
Thank you, Doug. Commissioners, any questions for Doug?
None.
Okay,
Thank you.
appreciate
Thanks, Doug.
it. And Mr. Pfeiffer, just so you're aware, our practice is to go through all of the public testimony. Okay. Just folks show up and want to testify, so we go through everybody first. So it looks like the next name that I have is Cheryl Capelli. I apologize if I don't say that right.
Thank you. My name is Cheryl Capelli. My address is 14605 Northeast Richard Lane, Newburgh, Oregon. I am a member of the Cedar Green Water Improvement District. Our subdivision community was established in 1977. Our community well is approximately 850 feet from the reservoir pool, and one home is adjacent to the proposed reservoir. I have concerns about the Stoller Dam that include volume, safety, soil erosion, management, and liability. Mostly, I wonder if the Stoller impoundment of water is going to run our community well dry. In my opinion, the conditional use permit process was working. It was providing transparency about the consequences of converting Stoller's long-term undisturbed forested land into a reservoir. The requested analysis of experts on hydrogeological impact, engineering parameters, environmental changes, downstream safety, and dam management and liability appeared a reasonable effort to protect the established community and public water. In particular, the land use form requests 40 acre-feet of water for multi-use, not just irrigation. Now, I'm not a expert. I just ran a conversion of acre-foot to gallons, and it is a shocking 13 million plus gallons. That amount of water is more than the city of Newburgh's 3 reservoirs combined. Or if you've driven up and down 99, that would be 3 Corral Creek reservoir tanks stacked on top of each other. 13 million gallons of water demands analysis, including the consequences to vital commerce roadway impacting the Highway 99 should the dam fail. And in my opinion, permitting such a project without analysis is negligent. Please allow the conditional use permit process to continue so that this project is properly examined. Please support the Yamhill County zoning ordinance 40304S that calls for a conditional use permit for reservoirs on property zoned AF 20.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like Charlie Harris is up next. Welcome. If you could state your name and address for the record.
Good morning, Charlie Harris, 19400 Northeast Jakewith Road, Newburgh, Oregon. I'm also a resident of the groundwater limited area. I'd like to primarily just reiterate what Mr. Rux had indicated. I think the applicant is saying, well, this is a permitted use under Brent Marr versus Jackson County. You cannot add any conditions to such a permitted use. But as Mr. Rux pointed out, the Brent Marr decision dealt with EFU land. This is an AF 20 zone. What's the difference? Well, the difference is, as recognized by the county ordinance and comprehensive plan, that the exclusive farm use land, as the county well knows, pretty much if you're in it and you're a permitted use, you get to do it. Unlike that, the AF 20 land has to balance farm uses with other uses and conditions in the zone, primarily forest uses, fish and wildlife, and such. And as Mr. Rux points out, the county ordinance does say uses of land which do not provide for sustained production of crops, livestock, and forest products, or for the proper conservation of soil and water resources and fish and wildlife habitat shall be limited or prohibited. In other words, unlike in an EFU zone, the county is in the position of having to balance farm practices against other practices, other conditions. And that's what the CUP process is intended to allow, is this balancing of different interests to determine whether or not we should go forward with the applicant's proposal. That said, I would the same ordinance puts the burden on the applicant to show that the proposed use does not interfere, for example, with the water resource and conservation, soil, fish and wildlife. And that process, perhaps the applicant can show that, but it's been short-circuited by this contention that it's just a permitted outright use. In fact, there are sensitive, threatened, and endangered species in the waterways that are fed by the proposed waters behind the dam. Winter steelhead, spring chinook are both threatened species. Lamprey, Pacific lamprey, is a sensitive species. So these things the county can consider under their CUP process. Along those lines, I just want to point out one other thing, which is that the county has historically deferred to the Oregon Water Resources Department for decisions regarding whether this is an appropriate use of the water. but the Water Resources Department does not necessarily contend with the same factors as are in the conditional use process. I think the county should not short circuit this whole process and should allow or uphold the appeal and allow this hearings to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question before you go. Approximately how big is your property? Does it border the
No,
property that,
it doesn't border it. It's in the same land use, same critical groundwater area. It's 12 acres of forested land that is timber producing.
timber producing? So is it AF 20 also?
Yes, it is also.
And you're actively cutting
Yes, we
timber?
had it thinned last year, 2 years ago by Shaw Brothers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I'm going to apologize on this one ahead of time. Andrew Croy. Okay. Welcome. If you could
Thank you.
state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Croy. I live at 14605 Northeast Richard Lane, Newburgh, Oregon, 97132. My testimony here today will focus on some data, specifically maps. The first one I'd like to present is the Oregon HazView Statewide Geohazards Viewer. It's from the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries. And it is a map of the area filtered for the landslide hazard susceptibility. And the area is in the high category. There are 4 categories: low, moderate, high, and very high. And I don't know when the appropriate time is to approach, but I've got that map.
Are you wanting to submit it? Okay.
It's not in color. I could submit a better one that has the more color detail.
Okay. Whichever, do they get routed through Ken's office? Thank you.
The second map is a slopes map for terrain, and this is more of a visual image for today for the commissioners to look at to understand the fall off in height. And so I'll present this as well.
Okay.
And just to summarize for the audience in the back, so the idea is that it shows the difference in height between the surrounding areas and primarily Little Hells Canyon being a canyon. It's the much lower than the surrounding area. And then the next thing I wanted to talk to is just, again, a representation of the size that we're talking about here, because I think size matters in this case. So the 40 acre foot is a measurement of volume. An acre is a square, is an area. And when you multiply it by a height, you get a volume. So in this case, 1 acre foot of water would be about the size of an NFL football field, which is 50 yards wide and 100 yards long. At 1 foot high, that's approximately an acre foot. And so we're looking at 40 of those. Another way to think about it would be a square area, an area of 2 acres at a depth of 20 feet. And another way to think about it would be 4 NFL football fields at a depth of 10 feet. And the last measurement that I want to clarify is that the downstream distance from the dam's edge to Highway 99 is 1.0 miles, 5,280 feet. And then the last thing I'd like to read today is the Yamhill County zoning ordinance 1202.01 purpose. And it simply says, the purpose of a conditional use is to provide for those uses which possess unique and special characteristics, making impractical their inclusion as outright permitted uses in the underlying zoning district. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, next up is Rosalind Rockweld. Hopefully I said that okay. Rock White, okay. W-E-I-T, okay.
Good morning. Thank you for the
Good morning.
time. You're hearing a lot of information. I'm learning a lot of information. All which is interesting with the same focus and the same desire that you are informed with information to make a decision for the safety of the farm and the people around. I reside at 15005 Northeast Coy Road. It is directly across the street. And in fact, my driveway is parallel to the proposed pool. We have been there since 1979 and know the Pikes very well, who originally owned this land, got it, and under the, should have read my notes, Oregon Land Act provision in 1957. They lived there for 64 years until they sold in 2021 to the Stoller Group. The pike farming practice was self-sustaining. It was mostly farmland. They kept some fields clear for the animals they had to sustain themselves. They processed the wool of the sheep that they had to pay the property taxes. Lee Pike told me personally in the early 1980s they never intended to actively farm the property for any agricultural activities or anything beyond that. They had a cow. When that cow was butchered in the 80s, they didn't get another cow. They had the sheep, the chickens, they had just read. The birds that make the fan and the beautiful peacock. Yes, I missed the peacocks. The alarms, the neighborhood alarms. That's what I was thinking of. And then as the elders had passed, the property was no longer maintained and became profoundly littered with cars and associated parts, tires, fire equipment, and garbage. And I watched with total amazement the truckloads of debris that was pulled out by Stoller. I'm going to speak to section 1202.02D. That is about the proposed use will not alter the character of the surrounding area in the manner which sustainability substantially limits or prevents the use of surrounding properties for permitted uses listed under the underlying zoning district. The review criteria that Stoller recorded that the reservoir site has slopes of 30 to 60% and is a class 6 soil and is appropriate for the dam because of the steep slopes. The class 6 soil category has severe limitations that make them generally unsuitable for cultivation, and they are restricted in their use mainly to pasture, rangeland, forest land, and wildlife habitat. The particular region on that property, along with our property across the street, is identified as a greenway by the county. And so I want to imprint that for you to understand what the properties or the land has been. This section was deforested with the intent to establish the reservoir. The size of the proposed reservoir includes the location where a 60-year-old barn sat. And I don't do farming, but I'm pretty sure you can imagine what is in a 60-year-old barn. My public health hat has gone on thinking on this. When what solvents, oils, chemicals, toxins, and more were in the barn seeped into the earth? What will be leached out of the earth in the standing pool of water? Transported to the vines, absorbed by the grapes, harvested, processed for human consumption. These are answers you need. This is information you need to understand. Historical testimony was given on April 4th about an artesian well that is on the property. I'd like to know where that artesian well is because it connects to the aquifer that our own well is accessing for drinking water. An analysis has to be done about that. What kind of, if there is chemicals leached from the soil, is now going to be migrating its way into the aquifer, impacting surrounding wells, the drinking water of the neighbors. Stoller writes regarding 402.10.c, once built, the reservoir will be unoccupied, quiet, and a passive structure. First question in my head, it's the lowest part of all their properties. How is that water passively migrating at least to the top of the ridge of maybe 200 feet an elevation gain? I think there's going to be some pumps running nonstop. Again, in conjunction with what was said earlier, all the equipment that then crosses the creek into the Washington County properties. This is all in conjunction with what I've submitted April 4th in writing. I wasn't present, but the other things that you need to be informed of through the CPU process is what is the dam hazard score? What is the earthen dam wave category? Should an earthen dam give way? And what I thought was 14,000 gallons is 14 million gallons. What is the trajectory of that water going down that canyon and directly hitting the residents along Hell's Canyon, Little Hell's Canyon Creek? In conclusion, I'm asking, there are too many unanswered questions, and due diligence is needed by Stoller to provide those answers before you. Then you can make an informed decision and a safe decision. It's putting the cart back behind the horse again. I've left a diagram where the location of the barn and the house are in relation to their proposed size of the pool.
Ken, do you have copies of her testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Did you get it? A copy?
I thought it was placed.
Probably. Yes, I got
Okay.
it.
All right. And Mary we emailed one. Okay. Thank you.
Couple questions real
Okay.
quick. So elevation wise, just roughly, are you about the same elevation as this property or are you lower?
My garage would be probably directly parallel to what the reservoir, where the reservoir would sit. Quarry Road runs between us, which is elevated.
Mm-hmm. And you have your own well on your property?
We have a community well. There is a picture. I
Is
forgot
that
to address
community
that.
well artesian?
Meaning
So
it's
you mentioned the artesian well on the neighbor's property, which is a positive pressure.
right. The surface
It's-
is on its own, right? It's-
Correct. So is the community well, wherever you get your well from, is it artesian?
It's drilled down to the aquifer.
So
We have a reservoir.
Okay.
Built in 1972. I wasn't there to witness. All I know is they drilled down in the earth.
That's fine. You mentioned artesian well on the other one, so I thought maybe you knew.
It's an open, exposed artesian well on that property. And there was testimony on April 4th how it was used in the day when power would go out and neighbors would need water and such like that. So this is an open source.
Right.
And given the location of the community well to that open source and the location of the barn and the standing water of the proposed reservoir.
My point of my question is that you made the comment that the aquifers were connected.
Yes.
To
it's
me,
assumed
that's
because
why
of
I'm
the-
asking is if the community well, or wherever your water is accessed, if it's also an artesian. If it's not, most likely it's not the same aquifer. That's the only reason I'm asking those questions.
According to the literature, an artesian well in so much distance to a well, a drilled well, is the same water source. They're not two separate water sources.
Sure. Okay.
That is what you need to learn. That's the information that needs to be dug up and reported back to you.
Sure. Thank you.
Commissioner Starrett, any questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think this says Tom Shad, but you didn't, no testimony. Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, and I want to make sure I'm going somewhat in order. So if you have been hanging out online and you wish to provide testimony, please raise your virtual hand. I can't read that. Does it say Mr. or Mrs. Boggs? Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Welcome. If you could please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Tyler Boggs, and we steward 10 acres of EFU land at 21555 Southwest Hells Canyon Road in Sherwood. And go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead.
I would like, we've been teaching permaculture here and regenerative agriculture for 15 years at this site, and farming on the mountain and in the valley for 3 generations. And I don't oppose the reservoir at all, but I would like to invite each of us to consider the long-term impact of establishing a precedence of a decision to view the establishment of a reservoir to include the deforestation and destabilization of sloped land and wetland and riparian area as a right without the process of conditional use permit. And just urge or request a process that gives the public the opportunity to identify and mitigate the impact through these conditions. I mean, that's my understanding of the purpose of a conditional use permit. And as I read through everything that I could that was provided, and I just didn't have enough information. We're a few properties down from the site, the proposed site downstream, and I have concerns about the environment, about the destabilization of the hillside, about the soil, about the impact on habitat, wetland and riparian area, and just would like to request that the board honor the code requiring conditional use permit for AF20 properties.
Great, thank you, Mr. Boggs.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. And I believe the last name I have is Catherine Jernstead. Is there anyone else that is wishing to testify in opposition? Okay, so you're it.
Oh, boy.
My name is Catherine Jernstead. I'm here representing Friends of Yamhill County. We receive our correspondence at P.O. Box 1083 in McMinnville, zip code 97128. Personally, I live on the farm that my great-grandparents established in 1891 out on Mineral Springs Road. I think a lot of what I would want incorporated into the record has already been done so by so many other people, but I do want to have on record that Yamhill County, Friends of Yamhill County, cautions against truncating public input and participation, and that although the circumstances are not strictly analogous, back in 2021, a decision was made based on a change in the applicant, the one who actually asked for a review. They withdrew their request. It was far enough into the process that Friends of Yamhill County had already shown up and provided testimony. And the opinion was issued that, well, unless you missed the timeline to pay for your own appeal. And so we were shut out of the process. That was overturned when, or was withdrawn when Friends of Yamhill County took the matter to file the notice of intent to appeal. And you know, you can spend more hours than any of us have reviewing case law and footnotes and one thing or another, but the gist of it was, if the party had participated earlier on, they had standing. And so we provided testimony at the initial Planning Commission hearing. We're here today. Although I don't have the knowledge of the property, we do want to point out that in 403.2 permitted uses, it states that the following uses shall be permitted subject to the standards and limitations set forth in subsection 403.11 and any other applicable provisions in this ordinance. My experience as a safety professional, I've spent a lot of time in rules and regulations. You start at the top and then work your way down. When you go down to 403.04 conditional uses, it says the following uses are allowed in the agricultural forestry district under conditional use approval. And it's quite a long list. Item S is reservoirs and water impoundments. And yes, water usage is a farm use within the definition of farm use, but definitions do not automatically convey permitted use status. So I believe that the notion that this is an outright permitted use is incorrect. And again, I feel that the neighbors have done a heroic job of trying to broach some highly technical issues. And I don't even really think that it's within the purview of county staff and employees to answer some of those technical issues. But it is possible to condition approval on the applicant meeting the burden of proof that this thing is safe and healthful. And not just to say, oh yeah, it's fine, but to actually get credentialed technical support for those issues. And I'm not one of those people myself, but the data has been somewhat alarming in terms of sheer volume and resources that are out there. I don't know if as part of the water right application, these things will be dealt with. But I feel very strongly that this is precisely the situation which requires the conditional use process, and that the neighbors have made a very good case for legitimate concerns here and would ask that it be remanded back to a completed conditional use process, either with the planning commission or that the board would take it on it themselves. The information in the online packet was not enough for me to even get a good image of what all the issues are. So, thank you.
Thank you. So earlier in the beginning of the meeting, we upheld the timely filing
Yeah.
of the appeal. So that's why
Yeah.
we've continued.
Yeah.
Any questions for Ms. Jernstead? Okay, thank you very much.
I would be more aware of that, except last night my internet decided to go rural and I'm back a couple of centuries at my house.
Okay, any other testimony in opposition to the application? Okay, seeing and hearing none, we will move on to our public agency reports.
And there were no additional public agency reports.
Great, thank you. And now we have the rebuttal by the applicant. So Mr. Pfeiffer, if you wish to offer rebuttal and or request that the record stay open, this would be the time to do so.
Right. Thank you, Chair. C. Pfeiffer again for the record, on behalf of Red Hills, Red Hills Farm. As the board knows, land use regulation in Oregon is not like it is in most states. It's become heavily engaged at the legislature, at the appellate court level, and in turn at the local county level to implement both the case law and the legislation that's come down. Counties in the state of Oregon have limited control over land use regulations and in fact are being driven by state policy and the appellate cases that interpret that. I'm very familiar with that. I served 6 years on LCDC. I chaired the commission for 3 years. I had countless local governments, such as you, approach me when I was chairing that commission about the injustice of this or that regulation that's come down, what the legislature has said and otherwise. Like it or not, for good or bad, we have what we have. And your predecessors adopted a code, which is the exclusive authority you have to regulate land uses. That code is still there today. Much of what you've heard today is what people wish that code would say. Considerations that they believe this particular agricultural operation, which has been the subject of 40 years of case law at Lubin, the Court of Appeals, confirming that an irrigation operation like this meets the statutory definition of farm use. They're indicating here, well, we wish that wasn't the case. We have all these concerns, and I'm sure they're sincere and heartfelt, but they're frankly not relevant to what you're deciding here today or whenever you reach this decision. You're making a purely legal decision on what your code says and whether Mr. Friday got it right in that Lux analysis. He provided the rationale, he provided the findings. And what you're being told largely today, notably, there wasn't a single appellate case authority, statutory reference supporting the position that any of the appellant or their representatives offered today. No legal authority whatsoever. None offered, none expressed, and I don't expect it in the next open record period because it doesn't exist. What does exist is the legislature's determination at the outset of the Oregon Land Use Program that exclusive farm use lands are going to be protected for farm use in a certain list of other uses, approximately 40 uses. Some of which, category B, can be conditional uses, but sub A uses under 215-283, ORS chapter 215-283, as applicable to farmland or agricultural land in the state, are to be allowed as of right. Now, your subsection 11, as people have cited to today, does have standards, but they're development standards, they're setbacks, they're parcel size. Those are not uses being limited. Those are the way or the manner in which a use that otherwise is allowed can be arranged on a site. That's fine in an EFU zone. But what the legislature said for sub 1 uses under 215-283, the first of which is farm use, and as Ken correctly pointed out, farm use includes irrigation facilities, and the 3 appellate cases that I gave you in my submittal yesterday, the first of which was in 1983, confirmed that irrigation operations and activities, exactly as Jason pointed out, are being proposed here, constitute farm use. LUBA's held that 3 times in the last 40 years. There can be no doubt that this is an agricultural use. So the next question is, what's the county's ordinance interpretation opportunities to decide whether a conditional use could be imposed on that, otherwise allowed as a right agricultural use? Well, the Supreme Court in Brent-Mawr did deal with that. Brent-Mawr versus Jackson County made it very clear that the legislature applied the law, adopted the law to impose upon every one of the counties in the state a prohibition on any use restrictions beyond what's set forth in 283. That's what the Brent-Mawr case stands for. Now, you've heard a couple of people suggest today that, oh, this isn't an EFU zone. This is an AF20 zone. Well, if you go to, and again, I chaired LCDC, I'm familiar with this process. You were acknowledged in Yamhill County in the early 80s as in compliance with statewide planning goals 3 and 4, farm and forest. There are 3 zones that implement goals 3 and 4 in this state: EFU, forest, and mixed AF zones, ag and forest zones. Many counties have all 3. Some only have farm and forest. You have an EFU zone. You also have the AF, I believe it's a 2040 and 80, 40 and 20. You also have a VLDR. Now, the AF20 zone implements the comp plan policies, as it says, on lands designated agriculture, forestry, large holding. If you go to the comprehensive plan, section 2 in your comprehensive plan, policy 3, Yamhill County recognizes that certain areas of the county are characterized by a mixture of farm and forest uses that include agricultural lands and forest lands. The goals of this plan on agriculture and forest lands are both applicable to these lands. Farm and forest resources shall be protected through mixed-use zoning for both types of uses. That policy alone confirms that your AF 20, 40, and 80 zones are both EFU zones and forest zones. And further evidence of that is if you go to the chapter of your code that is the EFU zone, it's not a surprise that the uses that are listed are exactly the same as the uses that are listed in EFU, both of which are understandably exactly what the legislature says the county is allowed to include in its code in ORS 215-283. Your forest zone doesn't include farm uses. That's a pure forest zone. So you really don't want to fall into this hyperbole that you don't have to worry about Brent-Mawr, as Ken appropriately applied in his decision, because the AF20 zone is not an EFU zone. You were acknowledged as both your EFU and your AF zones being EFU zones. They are subject to 283. They are subject to Brent-Mawr. They have to be read to prohibit any additional restrictions on farm use. I've provided in my analysis, as Ken did with the reference to Brent-Mawr, I provided the other cases where LUBA has confirmed unequivocally that an irrigation operation, facilities included, that provides irrigation to agricultural production on that site is a farm use. That means you're prohibited from interpreting your code to apply any additional restrictions. That means the only way the code can be read is, as I pointed out, that conditional uses for reservoir can only be applied and required on lands, well, in instances where the irrigation facility is not a farm use, which probably would mean it's not serving agriculture or irrigation of a farm product, or it's a water feature or a water ski lake or whatever else. If I wanted to develop one of those facilities, I'd need a conditional use permit. If I'm developing in conjunction with an ongoing agricultural operation, which LUBA has also confirmed, contrary to Mr. Rux, is the current employment of land for farm use, those cases are very clear, and you can't find your way outside of them. That's why Ken issued the ruling that he did. Now, a little bit of background, there's kind of, I'm not sure what it was, a bait and switch or some theory. I can tell you why the conditional use application was withdrawn in favor of submitting the request to Ken that he execute in the normal course the Lux required by Water Resources and every other state agency, so we can proceed with state agency permitting as required by state statute. The reason was I got a call about 10 days, 2 weeks before that hearing in April, before the Planning Commission, from Jason, who said, can you come and assist us at the Planning Commission hearing? I said, sure, what do you got? He said, we were building a reservoir and for irrigating the viniculture lands up there on Quarry Road. My immediate thought, because frankly, I've been here too long, perhaps, you don't need a conditional use permit. I didn't even have to open your code. I knew it wasn't a conditional use. I knew a conditional use permit could not be required because of the statutory requirements as those cases lay out. It's a farm use under 215, 283. Your code has to mirror that. Your code does correctly mirror that, and it's allowed as of right. Well, the hearing was scheduled. We went to the hearing. I reached out to Ken during the break in the hearing and pointed out to Ken and Lance that we would likely be withdrawing this application and proceeding in the normal course, which is pursuant to the case law that's long established. This use is allowed as of right and the conditional use cannot and is not obliged under your code because your code was acknowledged as in compliance with Goal 3 obligations and the statutory requirements. I didn't even have to open the code. So that's how it came down to that. That's why we withdrew. That wasn't some sort of a bait and switch. We didn't invite people to a hearing for no good reason. If somebody had asked me before the application was filed, that would have been my position, but it happened to have to come late. So essentially, I haven't said anything today that isn't included largely in my letter and frankly isn't included in the memorandum from Ken on the 25th of April that explained why the Lux was executed as it was. Simply put, and again, whether it's positive, negative from your perspective as a matter of county land use policy, and notwithstanding what I know are the sincere concerns of the neighbors up there, this county, as in many other instances, is bound by, under the Oregon land use system at least, the requirements of the statewide planning goals, the administrative rules that implement them, the legislative requirements in ORS Chapter 215, which is county planning, and the Court of Appeals, LUBA, and Supreme Court cases such as Brentmar that implement them. And given that, I can easily explain the phrase that Mr. Hathaway refers to about other applicable laws. The conditional use section cannot, for the reasons I've just mentioned, be another applicable law. It is not applicable. The only thing that's applicable to an EFU farm use under the AF20 designation is if it meets the definition of farm use in that particular use category, and whether the development standards, i.e. setbacks, parcel size, access, and the like that are in subsection 11 are met. That's the end of it. And that essentially is why Ken, I believe, as he explains again in his memorandum, ruled the way he did. That's consistent with a long line of cases. And in closing, any decision to the contrary would be completely opposite that long line of cases and not be upheld. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I don't need to ask the record to be left open because I think Greg already did. So you'll decide how long and all that, but that's fine. He's entitled to that.
Commissioners, any questions?
Thank you.
Hearing none. All right, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay, I had forgotten that there was that request, so.
I can present a schedule and then
Okay.
if someone wants to say so moved, if it sounds good and someone wants to say so moved, you can adopt this. The motion would be the record shall be open till 5 p.m. on July 25th, 2024 for all parties to submit written testimony or evidence to the planning department at 400 Northeast Baker Street, McMinnville. The record shall then be open until 5 p.m. on August 1st, 2024 for all parties to submit to the planning department written rebuttal to what was submitted during the first open record period. The record shall then be open for the applicant only to submit final written argument with no new evidence until 5 p.m. on August 8th, 2024. And at that point, the record shall be closed. The Board of Commissioners shall then reopen the hearing at 10 a.m. on August 15th, 2024, in room 32 of the Yamhill County Courthouse at the point of staff recommendation.
So moved. Commissioners, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Great, we will keep the record open and adjourn on August 15th. All right.
I know. Go home and tell my wife, I'm like, no, you're right.
All right, so we're coming back into our agenda and picking up at the point of announcements. Commissioners, I do want to acknowledge the passing of former Yamhill County Commissioner Rick Olson. I served briefly with him on the Budget Committee several years ago, and he will be missed by communities across the county. It was clear that he was devoted and loved his community. He gave much of his life to public service, and that's a very special legacy that he lives or leaves behind. And so I want to acknowledge that and just let his family know that we are keeping them in our prayers. Any other announcements?
Chair, I just want to also acknowledge, having worked with Commissioner Olson, we definitely were sparring partners for a number of years, but in the end, I have fond memories of how he kind of said what was on his mind. It got to be kind of fun at board meetings because he really didn't care much about filtering comments, and it was refreshing, and just enjoy his honesty. And the very first time I actually interacted with him was when he asked if he could apologize for a comment he made in the newspaper. And I learned a lot. It takes a big person to acknowledge that they had made a mistake and to ask for forgiveness. I also learned a lot about apologies and forgiveness from him. So I want to say to Candy and all his family that we will be missing him. And I do have just a short update on the Oregon Medical Board license. Licensure procedural rule changing that we had written a letter to last couple of weeks ago. The Oregon Medical Board has opened the comment period and will let us know further comments. The Oregon Medical Association has also weighed in, expressing the same concerns we did regarding the use of microaggressions as a form of discipline for physicians. So I appreciate that. Want to also acknowledge I spent some time at the Adult Recovery Court and witnessed 2 graduations. So we have 2 new graduates who are clean and sober, and just another addition to the recovery effort in our county. And just appreciate all the folks who work very hard in our adult recovery courts. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any announcements?
So I may not have known Rick as well as you two, but I do remember my first meeting with him was Parkway Committee. And in the background of the Zoom was the full wall of collector Pez.
Yep.
A whole wall. Absolutely amazing. I still have a picture on my phone about it. I went back this morning when I was signing the card and had to go find it. Transportation Committee Roundtable, attended that 2 days ago. And it's going to kind of tie into Parkway, so I'm just going to give one update for both. But brought up the PLA agreement to the legislators that were sitting there. Turns out, as of this morning, we have been confirmed that everybody's in agreement with the project labor agreement, and signatures are next, and we should be able to proceed with quotes for bids for construction now and start phase 2A, which is the Winooski interchange.
But that means we lost the summer for the most
We
part.
lost the summer construction that should have started this summer, so we lost the whole construction season. Not all is lost. If for some really bad reason that this 30+ million from the feds doesn't get spent in time, which is next December or December 2026, I believe, which is tight. There is plans to shift what we've purchased for right-of-ways or whatever for phase 2B. So there's avenues to where we feel comfortable that we're out of the woods on it. The other thing was just to the legislators that were in the room, we were touting and making sure that we don't get forgotten on the Newburgh-Dundee bypass and getting that finished. And it seemed to be, whether you were talking about the bypass or not, the main message going around the room was finish the projects you have. And they're going clear back to 2017, and that was heard loud and clear. So that's all I got.
Yamhill Derby Days is on Saturday, so we will see everybody there. And just a reminder, the fair starts on July 31st. Spend time, spend summer.
God dang, that came up quick.
And the signs are amazing. I've gotten so much just awesome feedback. People are super excited about them. They love them.
Yep.
So that was a great idea.
Yep, totally reusable.
Yep.
Yeah, and huge shout out to those guys. If you're on social media, go on the Fair and Rodeo Facebook page, and you can see all the families that donated their properties for those signs.
Nice.
Yep.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, I will adjourn the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal session for July 18th, 2024. It is 12:43. Thank you.